Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's live broadcast, Mastering the Logistics of Remote Visits in Global Decentralized Clinical Trials. I'm Terry Summers, Senior Editor of Special Projects with Applied Clinical Trials, and I'll be your moderator for today's event. We are pleased to bring you this webcast presented by Applied Clinical Trials and sponsored by PCM Trials. I would like to share a statement from our sponsor. Since 2008, PCM Trials has led the way in mobile research. Its certified mobile research nurses are driving the shift to patient-centric, decentralized clinical trials, giving individuals the flexibility to engage in research studies in the ways that work best for them and expanding opportunities for participation. We have a few important announcements before we begin. The webcast is designed to be interactive, and we encourage you to ask questions during the event. You can submit questions by typing them in the Q&A box, which can be found at the bottom of the video player. We encourage you to review resources provided at the bottom of the video player as well. You can enlarge the slide window by clicking on the small icon in the bottom right corner of the media player. The slides will advance automatically during the event. If you have any technical problems viewing or hearing this presentation, please click on the question mark Help widget in the top right of your presentation window. I'd now like to introduce today's speakers. We're pleased to be joined today by Ellen Weiss, Vice President, In-Home Solutions, Decentralized Clinical Trials at PCM Trials, Kevin Meek, PCM Trials Director of Supply Chain Operations, Mike Sweeney, Global Head of Strategy, CGT and DTP at QuickSTAT, and Chris Thompson, Senior Operations Manager for Woodley Trial Solutions. Ellen Weiss connects CROs and sponsors with right-sized hybrid and remote solutions. She's spoken on the logistical support necessary for IMP delivery and dosing, sample collection, and the services provided by clinical trial research nurses that enable alternate site visits to be carried out with the same data quality and subject safety as on-site visits. Ellen is a member of the Healthcare Businesswomen's Association and a volunteer for the American Society of Clinical Oncology. Kevin Meek has more than 20 years of project and supplier management experience in the healthcare industry. He takes satisfaction in creating better products and services for end customers through supplier partnerships. For over 3 decades, Mike Sweeney has delivered customer-focused and innovative solutions within global life sciences logistics. As a trusted leader, collaborator, and personalized supply chain expert, his expertise spans clinical trial project management, direct-to-patient and cell and gene therapy services, product management, and clinical through commercialization journeys. As Global Head of Strategy at QuickSTAT, Mike is committed to improving patient diversity, treatment options, experiences, and outcomes. Chris Thompson is Senior Operations Manager at Woodley Trial Solutions and is responsible for overseeing the successful supply of all equipment and supporting services for clinical trials worldwide, and with maintaining client satisfaction throughout the customer journey. As a doctor of cellular and molecular biology, Chris's passion for clinical research shines through, and his supportive approach is appreciated by both colleagues and clients worldwide. Thank you all for joining us today. Now, Ellen, please get us started.
Well, thank you so much, Terry. It's always a pleasure when we can collaborate. So PCM has been getting the right stuff into the right hands at the right time. And we've been doing this logistical miracle for over 15 years, as you mentioned. And we do dose and test, not only in major metropolitan areas around the world, but on remote farmsteads, on islands that are remote from anywhere, and every place that you can imagine in between. And our PCM model relies on the most direct management possible of the hands that are actually touching the patient. So while many in our industry are focusing on a community model, which is definitely going to have a key piece of our future, they often talk about the last mile or the last 5 miles. We're talking about the last millimeter because our PCM CMRNs, or certified mobile research nurses, are actually dosing and testing patients at the kitchen table, in a conference room, in an office block, a hotel room, or even the school nurse's office. So you can understand that getting the right pieces and the right equipment to the right place is essential in what we do. And I'm thrilled that we can have a collegial discussion today with just a couple of our key colleagues, and they are QuickSTAT and Woodley. We do work with other fine vendors as well, but for today, we thought we'd talk about how we engineer that bridge from the site where research has traditionally taken place to the kitchen table or other remote setting, which for some is a novel idea. But keep in mind, this idea is 2 decades old this year in 2023. So helping us carry the trial the last millimeter are the fine folks you see today. And in the early days, I can say most of our work focused on rare and orphan studies, where there were very few patients and they were dispersed widely across our planet. These days, we're seeing more uptake of our services in large format trials in more work-a-day indications like diabetes and Alzheimer's, kidney failure, and the list goes on. But that move to include more folks has transformed the kinds of patients that our nurses are serving in the remote setting. In the past, it was the very small and the very elderly, our pediatric and our elder patients. These days, we are seeing more women represented in these trials. We are seeing a wide array of minority diversification, which we are thrilled to see, and which, by the way, agency mandates now. So yay industry for catching up with what was always the right thing to do. And we are also seeing an increased rurality in our patients, which delights me to no end because I've been doing this work for more than a decade. But I can see that for both Chris and Mike, and Kevin, this does increase the complexity of what we do, because it's no longer that we're just going to a Chicago suburb or New Jersey across from the major centers in New York City. We are going into Amish territories in Ohio and Pennsylvania and Indiana. We are going into the islands far removed from, England. We are moving into places that it was not imagined even 5 years ago that this accommodation of patients would be possible. We are protocol adapting experts here at PCM. What we do is take a protocol that may or may not have been imagined with the remote visit option, and we are hybridizing that trial so that it is possible to reach patients where they are for as many visits in that SOE as possible. And we do need specialized teams to do this work, because going from the site to the kitchen table, it really takes quite a complex thought process and an array of vendors that really make it happen. So we know here at PCM that we can help you recruit a trial faster, retain the patients that you do recruit, keep them more compliant to the regimens that you have determined in your protocol. And we know that this can help you reach a complete data set and those all important data locks, perhaps on time, which is everyone's goal. We work to serve, and at this point, Kevin, you are PCM's point man for how we engineer this bridge. We rely on you and communicate. I am in communication with you almost constantly. So why don't I hand it to you at this point? And in this collegial discussion, we did try to avoid death by PowerPoint, and I think we've succeeded, that we can have a collegial conversation with these key partners to talk about our role in how we move from the site to the kitchen table. So can you talk about some of our current models for delivery and how they've evolved?
Certainly. Thank you, Ellen, and thank everybody for your time and attention for today's topic. When I think of mastering logistics, I think of that as management, the effective management of operational end-to-end supply chain operations. At PCMT, that primarily consists of handling all of those items that are needed to support our studies. We break those out into supplies. We define that as one-time use items. We have kits, which are basically a grouping of supplies that are typically provided by our sponsors. We have equipment, which are multi-use items, which are also used to generally produce a result, such as a centrifuge or an EEG as example. And then finally, we have investigational product and biometric samples, which are pretty much self-explanatory, the drugs that are administered in support of the trials and the results from the subjects themselves. Every day, we face two primary challenges at PCMT Logistics. Number one is accounting for the complexity and supporting a clinical trial in a home setting. If our CMRNs don't have the needed items to perform the protocol, we can't deliver accurate results for our customers. It's that simple. As well, we are managing trials across the globe, which brings tremendous global complexities. Many of our trials are in multiple countries, and every country has their own rules and regulations that impact logistics. We have to solve for these rules, or we are not allowed to operate in that country. Over the years, we've learned how to do this effectively so that our customers don't have to. I thought I'd take a moment to walk through a typical trial, but before I do that, I want to just point out that we can't do this alone, and we rely on a number of supplier partners in the effective management of this logistics challenge. We have two of those partners here with us today with QuickSTAT and Woodley. But before I talk about that, would like to recognize that with respect to the partners that we choose to work with, we do vet our partners thoroughly from the perspective of business fit. How well do their solutions and services align with our strategy, as well as the risk associated with working with them. We're looking at things like data protection, information security and technology, as well as the quality that they provide with respect to the standards of their operations. Rest assured, we incorporate all of those factors before we agree to do a partnership with any of our suppliers. Every study starts with planning. It's probably the most important aspect to getting it right. At PCM Trials, our clinical project management team will engage with logistics at the start of every trial to ensure that all of the needs across the items that I mentioned previously are met. With respect to supplies, we're looking at whether we have these supplies in stock today. We have a lot of experience over the years, so in many instances we have already worked with these supplies. We have them in stock. We are having them on the shelves either in one of our logistics warehouses in the United States or in the United Kingdom. As well, we have a 3PL in Europe where we store these items. For those items that we do not currently have in stock, we have to go out and procure them. We have to source them from someplace. That is where we would be reaching out to our existing supplier partners or potentially new supplier partners in order to obtain those items necessary to adequately complete that trial. As an example of one of these challenges, we've recently had a very high volume study where we've supported that is around infusion. And it required a specific high volume tubing in order to be successful. We reached out to one of our suppliers to ensure that we had enough volume and that we could adequately support that trial. What we found out was that this tubing was sufficiently rare that what our ask represented was over half of the volume that our supplier actually maintained. So what we did is we put in place a standing purchase order and a guarantee of utilizing that supply. That enabled our supplier to then bring those supplies into their central facility in the Denver area to be used for our study purposes. This enabled us to maintain that supply chain and keeping it from breaking. With respect to kits, again, I mentioned those typically come from our sponsor, but they also have increased complexity in that they all have expiration dates associated with it. So from a logistics point of view, we have to capture, maintain, and manage to those expiration dates to ensure that we're not sending out a kit that is out of expiration. Relative to equipment, we have two different ways that we approach that. First of all, we have a number of types of equipment that we actually purchase ourselves. Centrifuges and ECGs are an example. We primarily use that in our direct model. And then as well, we will engage a partner like Woodley on the call today to assist us with some of those trials that are more global in nature. But regardless of where we get our equipment from, there are some additional complexities in managing equipment that come down to ensuring that they are adequately managed and maintained, and that they're able to perform the results appropriately in a home setting. In the example of a centrifuge, the manufacturers recommend that those items be recalibrated on an annualized basis. So logistically, we have to bring those back in from the field. We have to recalibrate them, sometimes fix them, and send them back out into the field for a multi-use situation. As part of that process, we are documenting that with paperwork, and that is retained for quality and audit purposes. And then finally, from an IP and biometric sample perspective, we actually don't currently have those within our warehouse operations today. We are relying primarily on our sites as well as some central pharmacy partners in the management of those particular items. But when we have a study that involves those situations, we need to manage the logistics with extreme care, and we are reaching out to specialty couriers such as QuickSTAT, represented on the call today, to ensure that we're getting those items to and from the locations that are needed. Working with investigational product and biometric samples is very complex in that often there are temperature requirements, temperature control, and temperature monitoring, as well as extremely complex logistical maneuvering between the subject's home and ultimately the lab for processing of those results. While maintaining the clinical requirements, we are also focusing our time on the global aspects as well. Every government that we work with has their own rules and regulations, as I mentioned. One of their primary concerns is around the need for protecting personal data. We can't move items around the world without sharing personal data, either with our CMRNs or with our subjects. It's just a fact of life. So the governments require that we treat that with the utmost care and protect it and guard it effectively. We do have to adhere to all government regulations. Some of the ones that you may have heard of are GDPR, but then there are also more specific ones that are in country that we deal with respect to France, with respect to Italy, with respect to Canada, everywhere that we operate. Our partners and our operations account for this type of data protection. As well, every government has some sort of governing health body that we have to contend with. The challenge here is that typically those health bodies are written and centralized around the delivery of healthcare in kind of a hospital setting, which doesn't always fit in a clinical trial environment. Each supply and a piece of equipment that we are using for these trials has to be approved for use within that country. We had a situation recently where we were using a vein finder, a seemingly innocuous piece of equipment for one of our studies. We sourced this in the United States, and then as soon as we wanted to extend that study across Canada, we discovered that the Canadian health government had not approved our vein finders for use in that country. So we had to source another one. So it's just an example of a challenge that comes up when you're dealing with government entities. As well as we are looking at all of the supplies and equipment, they are classified within each government, and those have certain triggers and regulations around them that include things like importation rules, paperwork, taxation, and many, many more. PCMT has accounted for all of those factors in all of the countries that we work in. So I appreciate you hanging with me with some of those details. I know that was a lot of some specifics around the planning process. Now that we've successfully planned for our study, what we want to do is we want to move a little bit into some of the execution aspects. At that point in time, or at this point in time, I should say, our clinical project managers will be managing those home visits and scheduling with our subjects, and they will be submitting the requests for all of those items that I've discussed in support of that visit itself. Then it gets handed over to our logistics team, and we have to execute basically across that large, complex framework that I just articulated to ensure that all of the items land with our CMRNs in advance of that study and in support of that study. We have developed our operations, our processes, and our procedures all in the hopes of being successful in that delivery. Has PCMT been successful? Have we mastered those logistics? Good question. I'm proud to say that we successfully deliver for our studies 99% of the time, which is well above industry standards in a logistics environment. It is a nice metric, but ultimately what that means and what's important to me is that we're supporting our CMRNs. We can't do this without them. As well, we're creating an effective solution and a great environment in a home setting for our subjects, which ultimately leads to their satisfaction and participation in engagement in the trials. And bottom line, we're delivering results for our customers. So I think we have completed and done logistics in a successful manner at PCM Trials. Now what I'd like to do is shift a little bit more from the theoretical into a bit more of the practical. We thought as a panel that might be a bit more appropriate for this audience. One of the PCMT's values is that we figure it out. And there's probably no better example than that, than a study that we recently had to engage with the partners that are on the call today during the pandemic. And what we'd like to do is to share some of the dynamics around that support from a business point of view. Ellen's going to, I think, touch on some of those aspects. And then QuickSTAT and Woodley will share their thoughts around how that impacted their organizations as well. So I'm going to turn it over to Ellen to kick off the business aspects of that study.
Sure. Well, as a vice president here at PCM Trials, and I've been in this industry for 10 years and here at PCM around 5, landing me here just in time for that exciting way back machine era we're going to call the pandemic. So, of course, a company like PCM delivering in a workaday fashion very reliably, like a metronome. No drama is best way, right? That's really what we're all after. So to give you an idea of the scale and rapidity of change and the fire hose that the folks here on the phone were drinking out of, we know what March 2020 looked like. So in 2019, I'm a very busy person. I took in and developed about 72 RFPs that year. In 2020, we were approached 881 times. We had to say no about 800 times. Trials that were brought to us were too big, too small, too complex, wholly unsafe or unfit for a hybrid setting. Some of those included, could we do chemo in the front seat of a car in a parking garage at a medical center in Canada? That answer was no. We do try to be very particular and gauge for success. So the pandemic we're on, folks really got used to this idea that there could be research someplace than the site where they'd always done it. And, we all waited as we were hunkered down, communicating in this fashion by Zoom, by Teams, whatever it could be. We shifted from in-person to online as we are today. And it was a very personal reach out by text message partway through that pandemic summer, where the first of our sponsors, top 10 sponsor globally, reached out and said, we think we have an idea for, first it was a pre-vaccine antiviral trial, and that moved through its course, and then the vaccine trials were taking place. And then what we were waiting for was a treatment for COVID, something that could be administered to knock it down into something less than a stone cold killer. And those protocols began to land on my desktop. So late one evening, I received a text message that a major sponsor had a plan, but they needed to know, was it practical and possible to take it not only to sites, but away from the site? And what were my thoughts on that? Because I'd been in the industry so long, of course, responded immediately. Conversations took place. And in a matter of, I think it was 13 days, we went from, we think we have a way forward. Now we need to move it into execution and into the world. And we need to start this on a global scale, unlike most of our studies that start maybe US or UK based and then reach outward. This one was going to bloom like a cactus flower in the rain. We needed to not only build the logistics bridge, but also secure enough supplies to execute a trial of that scale globally. And again, that same mantra I started with: right stuff, right place, right time, right hands. And we could not have done it without the partners on the phone. So, Mike, can you share some of the challenges that you faced at QuickSTAT when we called with this seemingly impossible ask that you met?
Well, it is a crazy time looking back, obviously, and I think one of the things that everybody was trying to do was work together. Like you said, those Teams calls were very personal. Those discussions and those collaborations were deeper. We needed each other in a way maybe we had taken for granted in the past. And I think the interesting thing was this was really mostly happening pre-vaccine availability. So most of this work was happening, earlier in 2020, late into the summer and into the vaccine deployment. But I can say that hundreds of shipments were delivered, multiple accounts were set up in very short order, and it was a ton of pressure that was, I think, responded to very well throughout our organization. But it wouldn't have been possible without having all of the planning in very short succession, lining up these studies regionally. This was worldwide. This was work that was very challenging and affected many patients in many countries. And QuickSTAT's very proud of being part of that.
Sure. And Chris, from Woodley's perspective, not only were you dealing with disassociation of your teams during the pandemic, but you maybe had some challenges that we all were suffering with you. You had the supply chain wobble. Not only could we not find paper towels, you were looking for scientific equipment.
No, hello everyone. Yeah, it definitely was a challenge. I think that's what we're here to be. Some of the words that have been said around, I think partnership is the biggest one for us. We've been working with you, we were planning, and we were partners. We knew what was coming ahead the road, and we were able to hit the ground running. We've been in this industry for nearly 35 years. I think it's 35 years next year. We've been doing decentralized trials and managing them and partnering on them for over 15 years now. So it's something we're used to. We have great relationships with our own suppliers. We have our own stock. We have our own network around the world. We have sites dotted all over the world. So we were able to facilitate your needs very quickly. Very fortunately, we have the right equipment. We have the right advice. But most importantly, we have the right people. We have a group of staff that are absolute specialists in their fields. We're able to answer all the questions as needed. And as you said, within 13 days, we were there to sort of provide support and deliver your requirements.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, it was a Herculean effort to accomplish what we were able to together, which was a fantastic example of getting it done and making it work. I know I spent a little bit of time talking about the complexity that PCM Trials faces on a day-to-day from a logistics point of view, but I was wondering if our supplier partners on the panel could talk a little bit about some of the challenges that they face, what those dynamics are, and how you've created solutions in order to overcome those challenges and make the complex look simple. Maybe I'll ask Chris first if he could talk about from a Woodley perspective.
No, I appreciate that. I'm glad it looks simple because it's nothing like that when you scratch the surface. I think the biggest thing is we've been doing this, as I said, for decades now. It's the expertise, and we don't sit back and think we've nailed it. And it's coming here, delivering a class or a webinar on mastering logistics. I think we're still trying to master it, and day on day we're learning something new and we're constantly pushing forward. I think that's the secret to it, is refining our SOPs. As you said, when something goes wrong, we react quickly. We've put in place every potential sort of plan and mitigation SOP. We've built up this great network of suppliers. We have a wealth of knowledge of equipment across our sites that we can distribute the next day, same day. With that equipment, we manage it, as you said. Calibrating equipment is so important. You've got to rely on the data you're gathering. So we've got a medical engineering team who can deliver that, manage that equipment. For ourselves, we've got a bespoke software system. So delivering 100 pieces of equipment to 100 different locations is the same as delivering one piece down the road. We're currently, this year to date, we're in 60 countries, over 5,000 deliveries, nearly 6,000 different pieces of equipment. So when I say sort of we're learning every day, we're doing this day in, day out and refining our skills. I think having a variety of logistics options and support and partners like yourselves, Mike, QuickSTAT, having that support and that network is critical. Having a variety of options, but having that understanding of our distribution. MDR is so challenging and a constant sort of dynamic aspect to this industry. We've partnered with one of the leading experts, part of their board, actually on the panel delivering and writing MDR. So we've got that information there. We're constantly challenging ourselves to stay at the front of this industry.
Thank you, Chris. And Mike, how about from QuickSTAT's perspective?
It's a great question. I think, like Chris mentioned, there's a couple things that resonated for me. One is that we're always on that journey to master what we're doing, because every situation can bring something new. And personally, I like learning every day. It's been a wonderful adventure. Sometimes more frustrating than other times to get things done, but ultimately we work together, we figure things out. And I think the key in looking at challenges is anticipating them. Like Chris mentioned, in their world, ours too is very much a contingency for the normal. So we're kind of used to a little bit of chaos, a little bit of pressure. But this is a little different as well, in that there is a patient at the beginning or end of the supply chain, and that matters. That makes a difference. And I think that when you have a company that can understand and be triggered in terms of processes and culture around that, it really is important to coalesce and have that, I think, bonding through the partnerships that we have, through the service that we can provide. We look at ourselves as one small piece of the puzzle, and without a playbook, working through that with PCM Trials, when they come to us with new trials, maybe a new sponsor, a new CRO that has very demanding or unique requirements, we need to work through that together. And sometimes it's hard to say no, but other times it's the right thing to do. So I think working together, seeing what's possible, anticipating challenges, and as much as we can, it's that fine line of standardizing and being flexible.
Sure. I recall from that pandemic time, of course, personally, all of us were affected. You know, most of us hunkered down at home. I was out hyper active traveling because that was the demand of customers to come engage and begin that planning process, which, by the way, a typical trial takes about 8 weeks to set up in the US, 10 weeks, and for some countries a little bit longer on a global process. People often ask, how long does this engineering and construction take? And it's, again, 8 weeks in a US sort of domestic situation. Globally, we're looking at 10 plus weeks. We were asking you to do this in days, if not hours. And one of those situations that it occurred to me, because I was out in the world, but maybe it didn't for some of our customers and others, that you were dealing with flight cancellations. So your network was crumbling before your eyes. And in some of those situations, I do recall it was like, well, the regional airport flights are no longer happening, so I guess we're driving to Wichita. And the matter-of-fact way that came together, I thought, was emblematic of your team's can-do sort of spirit, and greatly appreciated by ourselves. So it was an interesting time for all of us, but now in the after times, I don't think DCT, Decentralized Clinical Trials, hybrid trials, call them what you will, will ever go back and retreat to what they were in 2018, 2019, but we have seen sort of a right sizing of expectations about the work that we do. And something I will say for both of you is that many of PCM's customers are among the largest pharma in the world. They have very stringent demands, and you met them all for qualifications. Chris, your teams, as well as yours, Mike, that is something extraordinary. And in the afterwards of a trial, of course, we see audits and lookbacks and regulatory reviews and so on. And it is with great pride, I think, that I can say it worked. It worked and it held water. So again, we appreciate that collaboration.
It did indeed. I'd like to delve a little bit more into some of the planning that is done, especially on the global nature for implementations that go country to country. Obviously, that's going across borders. It brings in all sorts of additional complexities, some of which I mentioned in my intro. But QuickSTAT and Woodley are experts in this in a global setting as well. And I think it would be helpful, maybe you could share some of your tips and tricks from a company perspective on how you've solved for those across-border situations. Maybe, Mike, you could kick us off?
Sure. Yeah, the cross borders is even within the United States. If there's a central pharmacy involved, this debate that's gone on for years about whether, whether each you have to be licensed in each state from a pharmacy dispensing viewpoint. But so we do see some challenges just within understanding the regulations in the United States. But the cross border, and COVID is a good example of really pushing those borders within the EU and beyond, where supplies had to come from where they could be procured. And there was a lot of push to centralize even before COVID in centralized pharmacy forums. So that could mean in country. In the EU, that could mean centrally across borders. And I think one of the keys for us is understanding what are the blinding requirements? What are the regulators? What do the airlines require as well? Because it may not always match, and we need to work through that. And we also need to know from our chain of custody, who did we pick up from? Who did we deliver to? So it's information that we need to know from a supply chain and best practices standpoint, but obviously we need to protect that information. But the regulations, I think, are coming around. Prior to COVID and even post-COVID, there was finally, a little bit of acknowledgement over the last few years that this was happening. And I think, to Ellen's point, it's been successful. The FDA, EMEA, they need to recognize and did recognize this is successful. It's happening. We need to figure out how best to support it. Now, there's more to the regulatory piece than this, starting with protocol approvals and so forth. But I think the key is just to have partners that have experience or can dive in and figure out what's possible and what's not. And luckily, from our standpoint in QuickSTAT's realm, it's not too difficult to vet. Can we do this? Can we not? There's not a lot of people saying no to direct to patient or direct from patient, but you do need to make sure that it's done in a way that is not going to, be frustrated at borders with dry eye shipments and so forth. So I think there is diligence that needs to be performed, but luckily this is something that is fairly common and relatively easy to vet and look through to basically just the feasibility piece.
Thank you, Mike. Chris, your perception of cross-border solutioning.
It's definitely a challenge, and it switches country to country, I think.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, pre-Brexit, everything was a lot easier. Post-COVID, things have changed again. I think MDR is something I mentioned briefly before, and that's a changing landscape. But even just in Europe, the local regulations from one country to another can be really challenging, can necessitate the information you require. We've got an experienced team to support that, and where we can, we've got over nearly 40 countries where we can support as an importer of record, or we can, if not, we can facilitate that, and we have partners that we work with to ensure that's there. With local regulations, we've got a database of that information as required, whether it's DOCs or language manuals, quality control, good manufacturing. We've got all that as a knowledge. We've stumbled across these before. We've reached out ahead of time to ensure we're aware of the regulations, so we can deliver that. We can offer you that partnership. One study we work on is a malaria study. We work really hard with our partners in Africa, and to ensure we do 2 monthly supplies. As you can imagine, sending temperature-controlled items around Africa is a real challenge. We've got a really robust process. We've got multiple delivery options. So if there's one area is affected, we've got an alternative. We've got multiple areas of control, down to the point where our logistics team is a partner for yourselves as an extra member of staff, and they track that delivery from start to finish. It's tracked, temperature controlled. Everything we do as a partner is to ensure that when the equipment reaches site, the study can go ahead. We're here to be a partner and support you. So it's doing all those things in the background, making them look as simple and streamlined as possible for yourselves. But those are just some of the challenges of sort of scratch the iceberg. You send an item to a different country and regulations change, and your study might require the same equipment country, but that equipment's not registered. So we've got that database. We've got partners who can offer alternative, similar equipment. And our biggest thing is, if we can come in the early we can come in, partnership is not more than sitting down and being part of an investigator meeting. We might not say anything for 2 hours, but there'll be one question and we can offer advice. And that's what we want to be, that partner, that extra member of your team, to ensure that your study goes ahead quickly, smoothly. And when you find patient recruitment and getting that study on time, that's what we want to help you with.
Yeah, Chris, I was gonna echo what you just said there, in that it takes a lot of energy and effort to hit that target with respect to those regulations. But as we know, that target moves and changes. And so what it does is it requires us to be nimble, to be in constant contact, and to adjust with or roll with the changes, so to speak, as far as the song lyrics go. And I think one of the values that we provide to our customers is that they don't have to think about those types of changes. They can come to us, and we're that collaborative one-stop shop that keeps up with those ever-changing environments and ensure that those standards of a home trial are continually met on an ongoing basis. And I think, you know, we bring some of those to you, you bring some of those to us, but together we ultimately come up with a collaborative way to make it happen and to make it work. I think that's a great example. Speaking of countries, in a global setting, there's lots of complexity going to various areas in the globe, made even more difficult in today's environment with a couple of global conflicts that are going on, specifically in the Ukraine as well as in the Middle East. And so wanted to maybe take a moment to talk about how the global instability impacts and affects your ability to deliver on your products and services, whether it's with the transportation, the staffing, any of those aspects that you might feel you would like to highlight with respect to, you know, how Woodley deals with the current environment in the globe.
It's a really tricky one. I mean, we're there to support people where we've got third-party logistics, we can deliver, and there's accessibility on the ground. We're there to support. We've done a lot of work where we can deliver to a regional hub or a local hub and can be collected there for distribution when that sort of final mile might be sort of compromised. But going back to sort of Ukraine, we continue to support them for an extended period of time, and then working with our partners when it was resupplies were becoming unfeasible. We were raising that, we were working with them ahead of time. And I think within 3 weeks, we'd switched from a predominantly Ukraine, Russia-based study to working in other areas of Europe and into India. And we have equipment distributed, ready, alternative equipment sourced, and we were providing that information. So we'll do everything in our power to facilitate as is, but also explore the other options. We've got a plan, and we don't want to, but when we have to make a plan and break a plan, we've got another plan, we've got contingencies. With delivery options, we have multiple contingencies. So if one is affected, we're sorted. I mean, currently we've got potentially an active volcano, which might be about to disrupt
Exactly.
We've already started facilitating our sites around Europe or in America, some of our other facilities in the rest of the world. We're bumping up stock to ensure that we've got a contingency if there is going to be a delay. We're trying to mitigate this for you to ensure that there's never a downtime at the service.
And Mike, I know with the care and feeding of IP as well as samples, having that supply chain is very paramount. So maybe you could talk about some of the contingency plans and mitigation that you've done with respect to some of these conflicts and situations that we've seen in the globe.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's something that we have to really be nimble and thinking fast and thinking ahead when we see something coming, such as weather, such as volcanic ash, which, you know, we've had several different issues the last couple of decades that have made things difficult. But I would say that I think generally there are, I think, better stories than what we typically see on the news going on the ground. And it's very important to understand from your partners what's actually happening, what's possible. The last thing we want to do is to put anybody into jeopardy from a safety perspective. So that's number one. But truly understanding the situation and getting that from a reliable source is really important for us. And I think COVID taught us a lot there as well. Where can we actually deliver into patient homes? Where can we access certain neighborhoods? There was a lot of misinformation that if we were just to rely on the news coverage, we would have felt impossible. Similarly, today in Israel, Ukraine, but then there's also governmental embargoes that the U.S. will place on places like Russia. So I think, you know, that's something that we constantly have to look at. But I would say I think the key for us is always diving deeper with local resources and support to understand what the true situation is. And it might be something that's shifting a little bit day to day. So communicating with our clients and just letting them know what's possible, what's not on a routine basis is the best practice going forward.
Sure. I know conflict is top of mind. I think we were on the phone with you on Saturday, October 7th, as those hostilities, you know, burst into our consciousness. But sometimes it's something more mundane like weather patterns. And I know you must rejoice, and there must be quite a champagne cork popping the day hurricane season ends, because I hope that your life returns to somewhat a more normal cadence. But that's something that our project managers are also mindful of. If there's a huge weather system moving into the Northwest, for instance, maybe we're going to have a visit window. Maybe we're going to push it to the beginning or the end of that window and coordinate with your teams so that we are assured that we won't have to plow our way into that driveway or such. So conflict, nobody's favorite topic, but even the mundane everyday things can trip up a visit. We build these bridges with GCP strength process. You know, we're at the whim of the wind and the weather and fates, it seems, but somehow you managed to get it there. So we thank you for that.
We appreciate it. I think the Wichita example is another way of looking at it, right? If you can't do it or reliably do something by air as you normally would, figure out another way. You can cross borders in Europe as well. It's very, it's good to be able to be creative and just figure things out when these types of situations come up. However, it does create disruption. There's no question about it.
Absolutely. I would like to take a moment just to offer again, if there are questions from the audience. I know we're fast running through this hour, so we may not get to every question, but we absolutely will follow up afterwards if you submit it through dashboard. We do have a question that is looking to find out some information regarding study participant is primarily consented and recruited at the site, but they may have a great relationship between site staff and study participant.
Mhm.
If that participant is then seen by a clinical team, a research nurse, how do you develop trust between the research participants and the clinical team provided by PCMT? And Ellen, I think you have some pretty good insights into that. I'll let you.
Sure. That's a terrific question. We welcome it. Sites are such a key to the success of any trial, and the site coordinator, if we all admitted it, really runs our world. They are that key contact between a participant, moving them through consenting and everything else, and all of the activities on that SOE to a successful trial. So one of the best practices, and it actually originated during the pandemic time, was that the major sponsor of this oral treatment for COVID began to mandate to us that we set aside time for each of our research nurses that we directly employ here in the US and directly manage or work with FSA partners globally, that nurse who would be performing visits in the home actually has a meet and greet visit, not only with the site, but if possible with the patient. And if we can manage the trifecta of the investigator or coordinator, the patient, and our nurse, that's ideal. That rarely is how that unfolds, but it's terrific that a PI can have a chat and review the credentials of each nurse. And that if possible, especially when we're talking about the littles, those pediatric studies, that the nurse is introduced usually through a call, a telecall, or a web call to that family to say, hi, I am Nurse Joan or Nurse Paul, and I will be performing visits in your home or at your child's school, wherever the remote is defined. But we find that communication and inclusion of sites in this process is key.
Thank you.
I did see another question, kind of related, and that is once a sponsor or CRO has reached out to PCM Trials for a new study, how much time does PCM Trials need to establish the logistical requirements to implement activities? And in the US, this takes about 8 weeks from a signed work order until we are having a nurse ringing a doorbell, wherever that may be. And that's 10 weeks in some countries. And I'll include in there, like Brazil, it may take many months longer. And I see that Woodley is nodding their heads because we know that some countries have a lot of extra requirements and hoops for us to jump.
No, of course, if I just jump in there as well, I mean, we always like to sort of give you a realistic time frame, but there's elements we put in place of, as you said, sort of Brazil, you've got the important record and you've got requirements from the government there. But there's a project we've done in Gabon. We're doing virtual customs inspections on site. We bring them up to our facilities or into Europe, and it allows us to flow through that process much quicker. No stops, no expectations. But there's always going to be that element of, at some point, we are constrained by regulations, governing bodies, customs.
We all nod knowingly. We're with you.
Absolutely. I do see another question here that is looking for some detail around how we manage stock deployment across our supply depots and supply chain methods that we use for DTC versus traditional. My experience and responsibilities are primarily in the DTC environment, so I can speak at least to that. As I had mentioned in the beginning of my preamble at the beginning, we do have currently 2 depots that are company-based. One of them is in Denver and one of them is in the UK. And what we've done is we have aligned the support across the countries, US and Canada out of the United States, as well as in Great Britain out of the UK. And then we also do have a 3PL that we work with that covers the European Union. Unfortunately, with Brexit, we had a strategy and a plan to service Europe in a different way that Brexit kind of upended. So we had to pivot and adjust and work with a different partner from that perspective. As it relates to studies and services that are about or outside of that geographic location, we will work with external partners to deliver directly. And so I hope that at least helps provide a little background on that.
If I could just jump in as well, I think
go
ahead. From an equipment point of view, we almost treat them as the same. A decentralized trial and a traditional trial, in some respects, can be treated the same. But I think a decentralized trial, you're delivering to multiple sites, and that's where the partnership is key. That's where we love working with yourself, PCM. It's that relationship. We have dedicated project managers who are an extension of yourselves. They live and breathe the study with you. And it's that communication. We set up regular communication points. We like to have, with some studies, we have daily calls to ensure that sort of during kickoff and during delivery, we're aware, because as much as you like to say we can plan, we're going to have 10 patients enroll on a Friday. Weather rolls in, they come a week later. Someone turns up and there's suddenly a patient, you want to recruit them there and then, brilliant. We're here to facilitate that. We have everything in place down to the point where we're forecasting, we work with yourselves as partners. We put things in place. As Kevin alluded to, we've all got depots regional, worldwide. We move the equipment as we need, and we move it ahead of time. It's that foresight. Let's do the planning. We do all that hard work unseen. So when that phone call comes in, when that request is there, it does appear like the Amazon effect, where it is delivered next day, but it's taken a lot of work to get there. So it's about that planning. Again, it's that partnership. You might not even know exactly what you need. If we've done our due diligence and we've got everything from here to here, that last little bit is so much easier.
It is. I think it's a key component and, a recurring theme in decentralized clinical trials and their successful deployment. Plan early. It's never too early. I think all of us agree. As soon as I am speaking with a customer and they might lay out a sketch of a plan, they might not even have a finalized protocol yet, but they might have an idea from feasibility that here are the 27 or 17 or 10 countries we want to go to. And that's a tripwire for our project management team to begin to reach out and say, well, this is something a little bit different, and this is where we might need to go, which is so important for our QuickSTAT partners. And here's some specialized equipment, an infusion pump, a spirometer, specific photography mandates, whatever that is. Sometimes we're reaching out to you, and I would just urge everyone in our listening audience, it's never too early. Reach out to PCM. We do very detailed bids that take into account what is possible or what is probable. If it hasn't been done before, we can usually triangulate from our past experience into what is possible. And the key to it is the hands that receive that package, receive that equipment, and are hands-on with your patient. I think we do it better than anyone else, but we certainly couldn't go to 81 countries without the two of you.
Thanks, Ellen. I'm getting the kind of notification that we need to be wrapping up here a little bit. I would first of all just like to say thanks to everyone for listening and the opportunity to speak today. From my perspective, while I can't argue that logistics is more complex or important than the clinical, I can say that you cannot deliver the clinical in a home setting without the support of a strong logistical backbone. At PCMT, we try to make that complex problem simple, and with the help of our partners, I hope you have a better sense for how we've been able to master logistics. And now I'm going to turn it over to Christy for some session wrap-up points.
Well, with that, we're going to wrap it up. I want to thank the audience for attending and for participating in today's event. I'd also like to thank our sponsor, PCM Trials, for making today's educational webcast possible. We'd like to ask everyone in the audience to participate in a brief survey. This survey will appear on your screen after today's presentation is ended. You'll receive an email alerting you when this webcast will be available for replay, and we invite you to forward that announcement to your colleagues who may have missed today's live event. With that, thank you all for joining, and we'll see you next time. Goodbye.
Thank you, everyone.